Today's conversation is one I've been looking forward to for a while. Most business understand sales, some understand finance, but not everyone understands how operations and finance actually work together. And that's usually where things break. So today I've got Dylan Curry with me, someone I respect a lot, who's essentially operates as a fractional COO or chief operating officer for growing service based businesses. Dylan spent over a decade in real estate development, property management, business development, and operations. He's helped companies grow revenue, streamline systems, prepare for succession planning, while working in multiple businesses simultaneously. And I think this conversation is going to be especially valuable to owners who feel like they're busy, revenue is coming in, but the business still feels heavier than it should. So, Dylan, appreciate you being here, man.
Hey, man, I really appreciate you having me on. Genuinely looking forward to this conversation. I think every time that you and I get together, I walk away feeling like I've learned something. So I'm really excited to be here. The phrase you use, the heavier than it should, really seems to resonate. In most cases, if you've grown your business in any real way, it's not necessarily heavier than it should, but it's definitely heavier than it used to be. And honestly, that's usually when people like you and I get called to come in and help.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and every time we meet, I definitely walk away feeling good and learn something as well. So definitely glad to have you on this recording here today. So before we jump into tactics, I want people to understand where you're coming from. You started in real estate, moved into development and property management, then transitioned into business strategy and more of an operations type role. What made you realize businesses didn't just need operations, but they needed fractional leadership?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And it took a long time, I think, is the answer. It took a long time to realize what was going on, picking up on patterns, things that I was recognizing. So when you real estate and property management, for any of those listening who are a part of it, feels a little bit insulated. You're kind of on your own, you're a one-man band. So it really wasn't until I moved into the business development and marketing side of things where I was really networking out and about, at chamber events, golf outings, industry association events, things like that. When I was in those settings, I was constantly surrounded by owners and operators. And it was really cool to get to listen to them talk, listen to their stories, listen how they came up, listen to how they've grown their business to now. And what really seemed to stand out to me was that, they all were working really hard, really long hours. They were experts or subject matter experts at their craft, and they cared about what they were doing at an extremely deep level. But then the caveat to it all was that they were stretched insanely thin, trying to juggle it all. And so one of the reasons I really like the property services, I've kind of always been, around those contractors, from a real estate development and property management standpoint. And the one thing I learned, from the property service owners, operators, was a lot of those people were technicians first. And so they started as a plumber, they started as a journeyman, they worked as a remodeler. And so they really understand their business or their craft inside and out, backwards and forwards. But when they look to grow a business, that's an entirely different group of muscles that they're working and stretching and growing. And a lot of times, when you are servicing your customers, you're doing the work and then you're trying to manage all the things on the background, it just becomes a little bit too much for them to handle either by themselves or it just is too much because they've never done it before. And so that's kind of where I come in. So the one thing I noticed was that the owners were really great at doing the actual service, being a subject matter expert in the thing that they do, the service that they provide, or the contract that they have signed and what they're responsible for accomplishing. But when it comes down to operating the business on the background, that's usually where they lapse a little bit or need some help. And so that's where I decided like that would probably be the best place for me to step in because I'm really good and I really enjoy the systems installing and working and creating management structures, identifying the right people to put in the right seats, and trying to figure out how to help them with their kind of hierarchy. And so that's kind of why I thought, fractional seemed to be best because a lot of it too is that they don't necessarily need someone to come in and tell them what to do, but they actually need someone to come in and do it. And so in a fractional capacity, it gives me the ability to step in and kind of be an extension of them, so to speak, and be able to handle and pick up and do the tasks and responsibilities that are very much needed. And so I kind of like it from that fractional standpoint of getting it to come in, implement myself into the business, really understand it at a very deep level, work with that owner operator kind of hand in fist. And like I said, be an extension of them in the company to help them get the things accomplished that either they don't have time for or don't know how to do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's almost like it sounds like as a fractional COO, that it's ideal for a business owner that up until this point has been mainly self-employed. Maybe they have an assistant or a technician or two working with them, a very, very small team, but they don't have anyone in that, that other leadership position to help them start making the shift from being a doer themselves to a leader in the company. So by bringing someone like yourself in, a fractional COO, helping with that operations leadership position, they can start to really make that shift from a doer to a leader. Would you say that's an accurate kind of description?
Yeah, no, I definitely think so. I mean, having someone help them is what they need, but maybe they don't necessarily recognize or want to ask for. And so that's usually where I'm trying to give them the best value from my perspective. So I certainly agree with what you said.
So obviously it would make sense for like, a very small team, whether it's just themselves or maybe they have one or two people. Would you say that is there a certain number of employees, let's say, that like beyond a certain number, it probably doesn't make sense because they probably already have someone doing that, or not the case?
Not necessarily the case. It's really about how they have gone about structuring their company. A lot of what I see is that the owner or the founder, there's so much dependency on
On
them
them.
within the
Uh,
structure
right.
that they've created. And so they're the primary decision maker on everything. They're the problem solver. They're the backstop to all of the issues and all the challenges that arise. And when that's the case, they don't fully form the systems that they need to have in place. So that way they can delegate certain tasks or delegate certain parts of their business to another person within their office or within their structure who can pick up and handle those things. And so that's really kind of where I try to come in and look at it from is where are the decision makers? Who's making decisions? How are those people making decisions? And has the owner or the operator given away decision making power on certain aspects of the company so that way they can focus a little bit better on some of the things that they're really good at and allow the people around them to pick up some of the slack and help them?
Yeah, you actually just answered kind of my next question. I was going to say, a lot of business owners I talk with think they have a revenue problem, which sometimes that's the case. But when we take a look closer, a lot of times that's not it at all. It may be a systems or a different type of bottleneck problem. Like operations wise, that real bottleneck may be the owner a lot of times. What would you say? How does it tie together in terms of the bottle we're talking about bottlenecks, systems versus people, whether it's the owner or other people in the organization. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yeah. A lot of, kind of going back to a little bit of what I said, which is, where you segued in, a lot of it is that they're just not fully formed quite yet. They just have been getting by, right? And they're doing the best they possibly can with what they know to do. And a lot of times that's enough, to make places successful. But what happens is eventually you kind of start hitting against the glass ceiling a little bit. You can only grow so much with what you're doing. And in order to take that next step and to break that glass ceiling and be able to really take your business to the next level, you have to have matured systems in place, systematic processes for the way you do routine, rudimentary things. Because really, where their muscle comes in is getting to overcome the bigger challenges. And because they are the subject matter expert and they have all of this experience in their line of work, they are uniquely able to work on the fly and figure out how to fix problems and figure out how to overcome, certain challenges that arise during a project. And when they don't have those systems behind them, now everything is a problem, right? Everything is they're playing catch up to get to and they're being reactionary. And that's a problem, that eventually that snowball, when you kick
Yeah.
it down the hill, turns into the avalanche that gets a little bit out in front of them and creates much bigger problems for themselves. And so It's a little bit of respecting what they've done to get to where they are, but then helping kind of shed the light on, if you really are trying to grow, these are some of the things that we need to put in front of you so that way you can grow into it. It's putting the railroad tracks in front of the train, not doing it as the train is coming down the tracks, doing it before the train leaves the station. And so that's a little bit about what I'm trying to come in and do
Yeah.
is provide them some of that structure.
That's a really good analogy. You mentioned how they're the subject matter expert, but putting the systems in place ahead of time is so crucial to them to be able to break through that glass ceiling. Having the systems, and with those systems, the right people that they can trust so they can delegate, they can feel comfortable that they can trust the people they've hired in those seats, in those positions, to take that aspect of their business, of their work off their plate, so they can focus on growing to that next stage in their business. What would you say are some, like, when you come into an organization, some, let's say, common like fires that the owner is constantly putting out or feels like they have to put out, but by having someone like yourself can alleviate that pressure or take that off of their plate for them?
I think the biggest answer to that is who is making decisions operationally or just internally. Where are the decisions coming from? If all of the decisions come back to that owner or the founder or the operator, there's going to be lag in decisions being made. There's going to be your employees or your technicians not having confidence in what they're doing, and they're the ones standing in front of your customer. And so when they don't feel comfortable and confident to be able to make decisions, be empowered with the understanding and the knowledge to make those decisions and be able to move forward, everything becomes a, let me make a call, let me do this, let me do that, let me call my owner. It undermines them a little bit. And then it also creates a situation where your customer is now picking up on the fact that that person standing in front of them doesn't have the authority or even the knowledge to make these decisions or do these things, when in reality they probably do have the knowledge and they know, what should be done. They're kind of asking because that's the culture that's been created is, oh, if I come against a roadblock or something is a little bit outside of the lane, I've got to call fill in the blank and get the next step or get direction from them specifically. And that is a huge bottleneck. Again, it undermines your employees. It makes your customers seem like you don't know what you're doing. And that's not the case. You want your customers to feel comfortable and confident in the services that you're providing. And you want your employees to feel empowered to be able to go out and do their work and do it at a high level each and every day. Because again, they are customer facing. They are the ones doing the work. And so you want to make sure that they feel comfortable in doing so and not always looking over their shoulder or picking up their phone to call. And so that's probably the number one. So it's really about decision making, who's making decisions, and how have you empowered your employees to overcome challenges in the field. And so a lot of what I'm trying to do initially is make the owner aware that that's happening, because it, again, culturally has probably just been organically taking place, and let them see that that's what's happening and let them understand kind of the other side of that coin. So that way we can, address it. And then it gets addressed again by certain systems, certain processes and procedures. Maybe it's just they need a reference guide. Maybe it's they need something out in the truck with them, a checklist, a decision tree sort of situation. I'm working with one group right now. We're actually building our own custom GPT that we're going to deploy out to the technicians that they can utilize out in the field. And through that GPT, they're going to be able to ask situational questions and get responses that we have structured and put together. So that way they don't have to feel like they need to call the office or call our owner every single time they hit a challenge.
That makes perfect sense. It's like two sides of the same coin when it comes to decision making. It's one is having the systems and processes in place. You help with that so that employees know the general, like, here are my steps that I take when these types of situations arise for making a decision on my own. And on the other side of the coin is, now by having someone like yourself, a fractional COO, you know, everyone in their team doesn't have to go to the owner directly. They could go to you, right, to help with certain things that maybe those SOPs or those processes don't give them what they need. But then they can go to you, which is even of itself one less thing that the owner has to worry about. And then, so that makes perfect sense. From the finance side, I usually see the numbers reacting to those same issues around decisions. It may affect cash flow volatility, profit margin erosion, and even the timing of decisions with spending money or paying, when do we pay bills when cash is tight, or collecting on outstanding accounts receivable. A lot of it does boil down to decisions that are either predetermined because we have a process and a system in place, or because the owners have the only one that's being able to make those decisions. So right there on board with you as well for my fractional CFO side of things as well. A lot of owners really don't understand what a COO does or should be doing, especially in a small business or startup context. If you had to explain it in simple terms, what should a COO be focused on that the owner usually isn't
Mm.
focused on?
That's a really good question. And I think the unfortunate is there's not a direct answer. And so it's going to sound a little bit like I'm avoiding the question, but where I come from, and that's, how I can speak to this is I usually start by trying to really understand who the owner is. Again, we've already kind of established that these owners are the end all be all. They're the backstop. They're the problem solvers. They're the question answerers. They're the ones who are orchestrating this whole thing. And so to me, it's really important to understand who they are as a person, what they're really great at, and then counteractively what they're not very great at. And so that way I can kind of fill in the gap for them a little bit. What I'm just trying to figure out is what I need to do and how I need to cater myself and my services to help fill those gaps, because I don't want to take away what the owner is really good at, what the owner is really passionate about, or what the owner does very well or does at a high level that's gotten them to this point. It's really about building around them a support system that allows them to continue to do the things that they're really, really good at, but then shed away some of the responsibilities uh, of the other parts of the role of being an owner, being an operator that bog them down. So that way they can keep doing the things they're good at and they can get rid of the things that they're not so good at, and then hand that over or provide a structure for them that allows them to put an employee into that place, makes that employee feel better, gives them some additional responsibility, and helps grow and build leaders and managers within your own system, within your own company. But trying to be very intentional about just finding out who they are at their core. Ask them a lot of questions: who they are, what they want to be, where they came from, what they envision being, in a year or two from now. And then kind of listening to how they're laying that out and picking up on some key triggers of, well, they say they want to do this thing, but they also just said that they're not good at it. So that clearly is going to create friction. So if I can pick up that thing and carry that to the finish line for them, that then will allow that to get done, but also allow them to keep doing what they do very well, not having to do something that maybe they've never done before or is going to be a challenge for them. Because again, they get busy, and a lot of times the things become too challenging or too time consuming to figure out or get through. That's going to fall to the wayside because there's so many other things that are coming at these owner operators so quickly throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, that that's going to fall off and they're just never going to pick it back up. So if I can pick that up and carry it to the finish line, that's what I'm looking to do. That's the value I'm trying to provide as a COO. So it's not really about, I do these things, so give me those things. It's more, I can do a lot of different things. So tell me what you're good at. Let me see where where I can fill in the blanks. But then, I think it's also really important that I am not a master of all things. I'm not, some genius. I'm not, fully capable of anything and everything. I have people in my network that I can leverage to help, with some of these processes. So it's
That's a
not
really good
about
point.
me doing all the things necessarily, and it's not about the owner having to do all of the things. It's about building a network around them that allows them to divvy away some of this stuff to either other subject matter experts or other people within our sphere of influence that allow us to work better and smarter and move the needle a little bit quicker.
I love that. Building a team, that's so important. And they don't have to be employees. They could be contractors. They could be more of a consultant type capacity. And, the role of being a fractional C-suite professional, whether it's COO, CEO, or CFO, that's a relatively newer concept in the marketplace. Probably only a couple of years old, really. It started to become more popular and mainstream. And the roles and responsibilities of a given professional, whether a CFO or COO, varies greatly on the individual and how they're choosing to build their business. For example, in my business, I only do strategic work. I don't do tactical work. So I'm not going to be doing bookkeeping or payroll or sales tax or any form of tax really. I focus on strategy because I know that's where I can add the most value by building a financial model that they can use and we can continue to modify, help them looking forward in the business. And it sounds like from the way you're building your business as a fractional COO, that's what I'll call it, is you're doing a blend of strategy and implementation and tactical hands-on work. So you're not so you are involved in the day-to-day operations of a business. So like in my business, I can take on just by myself 15, 20 clients, and build a team and take and get up to 50, even 100 clients probably if I build a team. Whereas the way you're choosing to operate, you're much more deep within an organization. So you're only going to have two, three, four, no more than five clients at a time. I know you've told me that before, but you're really focusing on adding a ton of value, both from strategy and partnering with the owner and other strategic leaders like myself, and then helping them actually go and implement those changes and take things off their plate and really being integrated into their organization without them having to pay for and hire a full-time person that would be doing what you're doing. So I love that you mentioned that growing a team and that, it's not the owner doesn't know everything, you don't know everything, I don't know everything, but together we can work together and then bring in other subject matter experts to help them meet their needs. I love that.
That's exactly right.
So what would you say is an example of some of the things you've seen in terms of what are things that founders might unintentionally do that get in their own way in their business, when you first talk to them, when they need someone like yourself?
Yeah. I think the biggest one is they hold on to everything, right? Like everything is theirs. Again, it goes back to what we've talked, what we've already kind of said is they're the decision makers. They've been the backstops. This business, this company, the organization has grown off of their decisions, to this point. And so they feel very comfortable and confident within themselves to make all of these decisions, big and small. That to me is kind of the biggest unintentional way that they get in their own way is that when the organization grows, when they have hired great people and put good people around them in their organization, they're still holding on to all the decision-making power. On big decisions, they probably should be the ones making those decisions, right? It's their business. But on the small decisions, the day-to-days, the how to handle maybe a disgruntled customer or whatever, those are some things that can be deviated. They can be given to someone else within your organization to handle. You can train that person on the language that you want to use. You can train that person on the culture of your business. Obviously, if they're embedded in it, they understand it at a different level and they understand it, through their own experiences as well. And so those people are bringing something to the table, bringing something into your organization that maybe you didn't have before they were there. And now they're there. Give them something, right? Give them some responsibility to take and run with. And that way, that's one less thing you have to do. So I think the biggest thing I see from a owner, operator, founder position is they just will not relent some of the decision-making power away, which is why that's one of the first places I look is when decisions need to be made, who is the one making them and how have you given that responsibility or have you not? Have you kept it and harbored it? Because again, once they do it, they realize that the things get done, that they get their time back, that they actually get to work on the things in the parts of the business that they actually enjoy and not all of these things that bog them down and weigh them down and weigh heavy on their minds and whatever. It's a very freeing experience for them. And they don't know what they don't know, similar. And so when they've always held on to the decision-making power, they're only comfortable with them making decisions because if something were to go awry, well, I made that decision. I have to stand on it. When somebody else makes a decision and it goes awry, that's a different way to handle a challenge. And, how you manage your people and how you manage your leaders, within your company is a very different muscle for an owner operator. And so they like to harbor it. And so if we can get them to start giving some of that away, get them to start, allow them to make big decisions, allow other people to make small decisions, that's going to really help them. And that's usually the direction I come in at first. There are a lot of things, a lot of these owners and operators, especially from my field in the property services. Again, these people were technicians first. They know their business inside and out. They like to work in their business. They like to be doing the work. They like to roll their sleeves up and get dirty. but they don't have somebody in the background working on the business for them. And so usually what they're doing is they're working all day, 8 to 6 o'clock at night. And then in the time where they should be spending time with family and friends or children or, having hobbies and doing other things that are healthy, they are instead sitting in front of their computer until 11, 12 o'clock at night. And they're trying to do the work on the business side of things in after hours times because
Mhm.
all of their day is taken up working in the business. So figuring out kind of what that is, what they're good at, what I can do, what can be divvied is really important for step one. And again, just like the unintentional thing that they do because that's just what they've always done. And so it's a mindset shift to get them to think about
Yeah.
it from that way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yesterday, I did an interview with an EOS implementer by the name of John Fox, and he talked about that too. I brought up the idea of control, giving up control, and he had a good perspective. He was like, really, it's trust.
Mm,
What these owners desire is trust. And you're absolutely right. I mean, there's plenty out there that they love doing the work in that sense. That's the challenge for them to give up control. But a lot of times too, it's just they don't feel like they can trust certain people within the organization or the process for things to get done at the same level of quality or even better than they could do it themselves or them making the decisions themselves. So having that trust is so important, and this goes for both, growing businesses, smaller teams where they're trying to break through that glass ceiling, but especially this is true too for those business owner operators that want to sell their business. You and we've had lunch before multiple times and talked about how if they ever want to sell their business, a lot of times they are the business. And if they want to sell their business, they need to have the systems and the processes and the people in place so that, they truly are building an asset, not just a self-employed. They're not just owning a job, they're owning a business that is an asset that can run itself. If they can't take a week vacation for fear of the business falling apart, something's missing, right? It's missing that system, that structure, those systems, the right people in place knowing what they should be doing. But by having all that in place, they'll be able to sell their business and get top dollar for it, or just enjoy their business for 10, 20 years,
right.
being able to take vacations and spend time with their family and not have to work till midnight every night, on the business because they've worked in the business all day. Absolutely. You're spot on there. What would you say happens when operations grow faster than structure?
You'll be successful, right? Like you will have success. And I call that sometimes a success by accident or you're being successful by accident instead of being intentional. And so when that happens, your revenue grows, you're all of a sudden you have a little bit of money to do some things with and be strategic about, but you don't know how. You are constantly chasing the next thing or whatever, and you're not building a structure and then filling it completely. You're just kind of building, going, building, going, building, going. And you're always in a reactionary position when that's the case. And so that's why it's really important sometimes to just slow down and build in front of you a little ways and give yourself, some room to come into it. Put those systems in place because they're going to be now what becomes the backstop when there is an issue or a challenge. Owner and that operator being the backstop, you can allow your systems to be that backstop and be the thing that gets stress tested and gets pushed kind of to the limits. And if you have built great systems and put great people around you, you're going to be able to take on, a lot more and your capacity is going to be able to grow when operations and revenue grow, but you don't have that systems in front of it, it creates some challenges. And of course, from your position, as a CEO, really what you want is for those systems to be in place and for everything from your revenue to be intentional. And when you start operating with intentionality, from a CFO perspective, right? Money becomes a tool instead of, just something that you have and you don't know what to do or how to use it. You can spend wiser, you can access cheaper capital, right? You can, properly purchase equipment and depreciate that, have that depreciation asset, on the books. You can hire people with intentionality. You can build teams within your organization to handle certain services or tasks or whatever the case may be. And now you're operating from a very different place. You're operating again, with that intentionality, but you're operating going somewhere, knowing where you're going. instead of just arriving at your destination being like, oh, wow, how did I get here? Now you're actually mapping yourself out and you're intentionally going from point A to point B, from point B to point C, and you're building something that matters and you're not just being successful by accident.
Yeah, I love that. That's where things really start to get interesting. When the CFO and the COO and the CEO or owner, operator, founder are all aligned, you have a unified direction and you have systems in place to where each of these individuals can really work together to grow the business. Things really get interesting. From your perspective, when operations and finance are actually aligned, what changes inside the business? You just mentioned several. I mean, hiring decisions and cheaper capital and all that. But what would you say more specifically, or is another example of um, what changes when those two are aligned,
Yeah.
operations and finance?
Honestly, you start getting the jobs that you've always wanted to get. A lot of these companies that I
Interesting.
work with, I'm talking plumbers and contractors and remodelers and HVAC and, a lot of these service-based groups, they start out, with good intentions. The owner operator is again excellent at his craft and offers, tremendous value potentially to his customers. But let's take HVAC. You can go full residential and all you do is residential HVAC. A lot of the guys, they want to get into doing some commercial and industrial mechanical systems. They're larger, a little bit more complex. Commercial industrial usually comes with a different price tag. And so, you're getting some higher ticket projects, potentially when that's the case. And all of a sudden, what you recognize happens or what you see happening when everybody has alignment is those projects start to come back. You start to receive those phone calls. You start to, when you provide your bid or you provide your estimate, you start winning and you start getting the call to get on the schedule and perform that service. And that's really, really exciting that you've taken that next step. A lot of HVAC companies are perfectly fine always staying in the residential space, but the ones that want to grow into a commercial capacity, you'd have to take steps. You have to be intentional about the steps because that's different certifications and different things that you have to have. And you have to have those things before you can get those projects. And so if you know what you're trying to do and you build a system and a structure to get yourself there, when you get there, now all of a sudden that next level of opportunities, they become available to you. And when you've done it correctly and everybody is pulling in the same direction, those things start to fall in your favor. And that's when you get to start doing some really unique projects. You start, making a little bit more money. You start operating maybe with a little bit wider margins. And when that happens, again, you have more money to operate with. You can hire better. You can buy better equipment. You can market better. You can spend money on advertising that you didn't have. And now all of a sudden your business is really growing. But it takes all of the people within your organization, and especially at the leadership level, to be operating and thinking about it in the same way with the same goal, with the same, their eye on the same prize to get everybody to that point. But once you get there, like I said, things start falling into place and some aha moments start happening and really exciting growth can take place.
Yeah, absolutely. Being proactive versus just reactive because you have that plan in place. Yeah, some of the most strategic work that I can do for a company as a CFO happens way before the money is spent, not after, certainly. And I want to talk a bit about come back to the idea of exiting a business, whether they're going to sell the business or leave it to a loved one or even the employees through an ESOP program or something. You've worked with owners that say they want freedom, but still operate like everything depends on them. What actually has to change operationally for a business to become sellable or transferable, or at a minimum, simply less stressful to own?
Yeah. Well, it's about the systems, right? It's about the structure. A real business is really just a intricate series of different systems working together, handling different parts of the job, different tasks, different responsibilities that help you overcome challenges and grow and come up. And the more you grow, the more complex those systems become, the more systems you need to implement, and the more the wires can get crossed. The hard truth is business owners are not the business, and the business cannot be you, the owner. Most owners get into business because, again, they knew the trade, they cared deeply about it, they believed they could offer, a better service or maybe a better pricing structure. And honestly, likely they were right, which is why they've had success to this point. But the difference with being a local operator and a national, big national brand, a corporate structure, a private entity back or private equity backed group is ultimately just the systems that are in place. For those who are familiar with a franchise model, one of the best things about franchise models is that they've thought about all of the things already. And they've already created systems that help with roles and responsibilities. They've already helped with processes. They've already created some accountability, right, within the systems that they've implemented. And when you start a business from scratch, you have to do all those things yourself. You have to know that you need them, recognize that they're there or not there, and then know how to go about finding and implementing and inputting the right structure and the right system around you so you can do that very intentional growth to allow yourself to take that step back. Business owners, they want to do a couple things. What you said earlier, they either want to have a job that they really enjoy and they get to go to every single day, and they can do that for 20, 25 years, save up enough money, and maybe one day retire, right? But then there are the other ones who want to grow an empire. They're the other ones who want to grow something to give to their kids. And then there's the group of people who recognize that if they build a business based on systems and structures, that now they have a sellable or a transferable entity, that business is not them. The business, they are not the business. They actually have something that they can sell to somebody else, and that person can step in and operate that business on day one, the same way that you operated it on your last day. And that is really important. So again, it's just a matter of systems and structure around that owner, around that company that allows them the ability to put people in the right place, take a step backwards themselves, operate autonomously, right? Like everybody wants a business where you can go on a vacation and not get 100 voicemails before you've left the airport. You want to be able to come and go. You want that business to be healthy. And that's the sign of a healthy business, that you have a business that can operate without your daily input or without you being one person who makes all those decisions and harbors all that decision-making power. So if you can create the systems around yourself and the structure and the network around you as an owner operator, now you can sell it. Now you can go on vacation. Now you can, instead of working 70, 80 hours a week, you can go back to working 40 and have a life and spend time with your wife and your kids or your hobbies or whatever the case may be. And those things are equally as important, sometimes even more so, obviously, than operating a healthy business.
I love that. I want to ask you one more final question before we go. If you could give one piece of advice to owners who feel stuck, who feel frustrated, they don't feel free, right? They're doing well, but they're feeling these different emotions. What would that one piece of advice be for them?
That's a good one. I think, give me a call. It might be the correct answer there. But seriously, I mean, if your business is starting to feel heavy, like you said earlier, or suddenly overwhelming in some way, it's a signal that you need help. It's a signal that maybe you've grown beyond what you're capable of, either through time or energy, effort, knowledge, experience, all those things. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I think the most important question is for those owners, operators to honestly look at themselves and answer, do I want to keep growing or do I want to shrink? And do I want things to go back to the way that they were? And there's no right or wrong answer to that either. It's ultimately up to them. Again, some people want to own the job that they do and they want to have, the ability to come and go and do the things and take Wednesdays off to go fishing or golfing or whatever. And some want to build an absolute empire, something that disrupts the market, something that is worth hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever the case may be. And those are two completely different mindsets. And so I think it's really important for them to ask themselves real questions and give themselves real answers. If they are up for the challenge of growing a business, putting systems in place, hiring people, managing, creating an environment and a culture and whatever where business works and we work hard and we play hard and we get to go home and we get to do these things, that's one thing. But if you just want to own and operate a single truck and work on your own time and have your wife do the books and have her do the schedule and whatever, that's perfectly fine too. But you need to know who you are, what you want to do, and be honest with yourself about the way that looks. Because ultimately, when you're starting to feel overwhelmed or the business is starting to feel heavy, you're at a proverbial fork in the road. You have to make a decision because growing requires change and is hard, and shrinking down requires you to change and is hard. But what obviously can't work is you staying the same and operating the way you have, because the reason that you feel heavy or the reason that you feel overwhelmed is because that the business that you've built has outgrown the way that it's currently being ran. So that would be my advice.
That's great advice. Yeah, from what I do on the CFO side, finances can't fix operations that are broken, and operations that aren't working well, or even if they are working well, they, can't give clear visibility around the financial side either of a business. But when the two work together, that's when there's clarity and confidence and you have options as a business owner. Well, Dylan, thank you so much for being here on the call today. I'm for sure going to give you a year of free access to my new web app, the Cash Flow Optimizer. I think you'll find a lot of value in that as you work with these different business owners. And for anyone that's watching, if you've liked this content, be sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment below. And we'll see you all on the next one.